The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and fading autumn leaves. As Jake made his way down the narrow street, the chill of the evening creeping into his bones. He had promised Sarah he'd be there by 8, and though he was running late, the anticipation of seeing her lit a fire in his chest. The streetlights flickered to life, casting long shadows that danced along the cracked pavement. With each step, he felt the weight of the world lift, if only for a moment. But that moment was fleeting, as he soon became aware of the unsettling sensation of being watched. At first he brushed it off as paranoia. It was late, and the streets were empty, save for the occasional rustle of leaves or distant bark of a dog. But as he turned a corner, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. He glanced over his shoulder, and there he was, a figure cloaked in darkness, moving with an unsettling calmness. Jake's heart raced. The man was not far behind him, his footsteps echoing ominously in the still of the night. Panic surged through Jake's veins, and he quickened his pace, the sound of his own breathing drowning out the world around him. He turned onto a side street, hoping to lose his pursuer, but the figure followed, unwavering. With every glance back, Jake could see the man's face, obscured but menacing, a twisted smile that seemed to stretch beyond the bounds of normalcy. The streetlights flickered again, illuminating the man's silhouette, just long enough for Jake to catch a glimpse of something glinting in his hand. A knife, sharp and glimmering with the promise of violence. Jake's instincts kicked in. He sprinted, the adrenaline coursing through him like fire. He could hear the man's footsteps gaining on him, the sound a relentless drumbeat that urged him to run faster. He darted into an alley, heart pounding, breath ragged. He pressed himself against the cold brick wall, hoping to blend into the shadows, praying the man would pass him by. But the footsteps halted, and Jake's heart sank as he heard the man's voice, a low, mocking tone that sent chills down his spine. "Where are you hiding, Jake?" How did he know his name? Jake's mind raced as he fought to quell the rising tide of fear. He needed to get to Sarah's house, needed to escape this nightmare. He glanced back, and the figure stood at the mouth of the alley, a predator watching his prey. In that moment, Jake made a decision. He dashed out of his hiding place, sprinting toward the main road, praying for safety. The man shouted behind him, laughter laced with malice. But Jake didn't look back. He ran until his lungs burned, until the lights of Sarah's house finally came into view. As he reached her front porch, he pounded on the door, urgency pulsing through his veins. The door swung open, and Sarah's concerned face met him. He stumbled inside, breathless and terrified, locking the door behind him. The laughter faded into the night, but the memory of that chase would haunt him long after he left her house. The storm raged outside, rain lashing against the windows like 1,000 tiny fists. Inside the cozy home, the atmosphere was warm, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. But even in the comfort of home, unease crept in. Lisa sat on the couch, her eyes glued to the flickering screen of the television, the news reporting on the storm and its aftermath. The wind howled, and with each gust, the windows rattled, sending shivers down her spine. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated the room, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. It was then that Lisa heard it, a soft tapping at the window. She turned her head slowly, heart racing, and peered through the rain-soaked glass. A figure stood outside, obscured by the downpour, but she could make out the outline of a man, his face hidden beneath a dark hood. "Who is it?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The tapping continued, more insistent now, a rhythmic beat that sent her pulse racing. She glanced at the door, contemplating whether to call for help or confront the stranger. But before she could decide, the figure stepped closer, and she could see his eyes, dark, hollow, and filled with something that sent a jolt of fear through her. She jumped to her feet, heart pounding. The man raised a hand, gesturing as if to beckon her closer. Lisa's instincts screamed at her to run, but curiosity held her in place. The figure mouthed something, his lips moving in a silent plea. The storm raged on, drowning out any sound that might have escaped his lips. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, He vanished into the shadows, leaving Lisa breathless and trembling. She rushed to the door, peering through the peephole, but the porch was empty. Panic settled in her chest as she grabbed her phone, dialing 911, her hands shaking. "Hello, what's your emergency?" the operator asked. But before Lisa could respond, she heard it, a voice soft and familiar, calling from the basement. "Lisa, come down here, sweetheart." Her mother's voice. It was soothing, a balm to her frayed nerves. But there was something off about it. Her mother had gone out for the evening, and the basement door was locked. Lisa hesitated, fear clawing at her throat. "Mom?" she called back, but the voice only grew more insistent, more pleading. "Please, Lisa, come down. I need you." The voice was wrong, twisted in a way that made her skin crawl. Suddenly, the reality of the situation crashed down on her. The man at the window, the voice from the basement. It all felt connected, a sinister thread weaving through the fabric of her night. She backed away from the door, heart racing. And just as she turned to flee, the door rattled violently. The figure had returned, pounding on the door, demanding to be let in. Lisa felt a scream bubble up within her, but she clamped her hand over her mouth, fighting for control. The pounding grew louder, more frantic, and she knew she had to escape. She darted toward the kitchen, grabbing a knife from the counter, her heart pounding in her ears. The door splintered as the figure pushed against it, and Lisa backed away, ready to defend herself. The storm raged outside, a cacophony of noise that drowned out her racing thoughts. She had to think, had to act. With one final glance at the door, she bolted for the back exit, praying for safety as the storm howled behind her. In a quiet neighborhood, the moon hung low in the sky, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape. A grandmother, Margaret, walked her dog, Baxter, along the familiar path that wound through the park. The air was crisp, the kind of night that felt alive with possibility. But as she strolled, a sense of foreboding settled over her. The park was empty, an eerie silence enveloping her as she continued down the path. Suddenly she heard a rustle in the bushes, and her heart skipped a beat. She stopped, straining to hear, but the sound faded into the night. Baxter barked, tugging at his leash, eager to continue. Margaret chuckled softly, reassuring herself that it was probably just a raccoon or some other harmless creature. But as they continued, the feeling of being watched returned, prickling at her skin. They turned a corner, and that's when she saw him. A man standing at the edge of the path, his silhouette dark against the moonlight. He was watching her, his eyes glinting in the darkness. Panic surged through her as she tightened her grip on Baxter's leash. "Come on, boy," she whispered, urging him to move faster. But the man stepped forward, blocking her path. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice low and smooth, but there was an edge to it that sent chills down her spine. Margaret forced a smile, trying to remain calm. "Just out for a walk," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. The man's smile widened, revealing teeth that gleamed unnaturally in the moonlight. "Nice dog you have there," he said, taking a step closer. Baxter growled, sensing the tension, and Margaret felt a surge of fear. She needed to get away. "I really should be going," she said, attempting to sidestep him, but he moved to block her again. "Not so fast, lady," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more menacing. "I think you owe me something." Margaret's heart raced as she scanned the area for help, but the park was deserted. She felt trapped, cornered. "I don't have anything," she stammered, her mind racing for a way out. The man took another step closer, and in that moment, Margaret knew she had to fight. With a sudden burst of courage, she swung the leash, hitting him in the face. Baxter lunged forward, barking ferociously, and in that instant, she turned and ran. She sprinted down the path, her heart pounding in her chest, the sound of her footsteps echoing in the stillness. She could hear the man behind her, cursing and stumbling, but she didn't look back. Margaret's legs burned as she pushed herself harder, praying for safety. She finally reached the street, the glow of the streetlights a beacon of hope. She dashed across, her breath coming in ragged gasps, and didn't stop until she reached her front door. She fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking, and finally burst inside, slamming the door shut behind her. The man's laughter echoed in her mind, a haunting reminder of how close she had come to danger. She locked the door, collapsing against it, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She had escaped, but the memory of that encounter would linger long after the night had faded. In a forgotten part of town, two boys, Max and Leo, stood before the decrepit structure of an abandoned house, its windows shattered and walls crumbling. They had heard the stories whispered among their friends, tales of a notorious gang that once roamed these streets, their sinister deeds etched into the very foundation of the building. But curiosity outweighed fear, and the boys dared each other to explore the haunted relic.